So how are you doing, man? How's life treating you at the moment?
Yeah, good, thanks. It's kind of just sort of feeling like things are getting going again after COVID stuff. So, yeah, shows are kind of busy. The
Mm,
restrictions have kind of mellowed out, and it's really cool to be back in clubs and
yeah,
being able to play tunes out that we're making and actually hear them on a system. So,
yeah,
yeah, it's pretty cool to be back out there.
yeah. Were you? I know you're not a social media guy, and I do want to talk about that later on in the chat because it's
Okay.
quite unique in today's music landscape. But were you one of those guys also streaming on like Twitch or Facebook or stuff like that during the pandemic, or did you completely avoid that side of things?
I pretty much avoided it. I think I did a couple of streams organized by stream um, guys. I'm trying to remember exactly the name. I'll have to come back to you. The one I did in Bristol. Um, but yeah, more or less wasn't on Twitch or any of
Mm,
like, yeah, streaming from my studio or house or anything like that. So no, I kind of just went dark and
mm,
I kind of made tunes and released a dub pack
yeah.
at the end of that first year of lockdown. So that was kind of the kind of result of that time away to some extent. But yeah, no, wasn't really on the streaming game.
Yeah. Never tempted you, or just not your
Well,
thing?
to be honest, we were kind of lucky because in Bristol and a little bit in London as well, there were these sit down events that started quite early in,
Mm,
and I played quite a few of the high rise hub sit down events in Bristol. And I'm so bad with names and memory. I'm trying to remember the one in Tottenham um,
I'm sure
that I
people
played for.
can comment down below whatever it
We'll
is.
comment, yeah, and I'll remember. I can dig it out. But yeah, it was that place in Tottenham that for London was one of the spots doing really well, just to keep events going. So that was kind of mainly the output of DJ sets. But to be honest, between me and a few other DJs, we'd literally been non-stop
Mm,
traveling and airports and gigs for like 15 years. So to
yeah,
have a kind of forced kind of holiday in that sense, or kind of, forced leave from that mission rat race was kind of, it's not like that hectic, but it was just weird to not be in an airport and not be
mm,
going anywhere. So I kind of just thought I'm going to make the most of this and just get in the studio and, chill out and do what other people did, started getting into like walks or sort of,
yeah,
and just stuff like that. So, yeah, it was cool in that sense, just to have a little change of scene.
yeah. And so, how was the? I don't want to linger too much on COVID and all that because I started this podcast during the pandemic and I've talked about COVID on pretty much every single episode, so I'm kind of sick of it
Yeah,
as
I hear
most
that.
people are. But I am curious because you've been producing and DJing for so long, and that was probably the longest break you took, I imagine, from DJing in one stretch. So
Yeah.
how was it coming back to DJing? Like do you remember your first gig getting back to DJing?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the first. I think the first one of the first. Yeah, there was a weekend. I think it was the Goldie XOYO residency,
Yeah.
and I had two other shows that weekend. And that to come back to just doing three in a weekend was definitely. And I actually caught COVID on that
Oh shit.
weekend. On that one gig. So yeah, it kind of. Um, yeah, that kind of was a pretty grueling weekend, and from being out of the loop of driving, because I drove to all three gigs and they were all over the UK, so that one really wiped me out.
Yeah.
And but on the flip side, it was amazing to be back in clubs for proper with a full crowd and kind of thankfully I've DJ'd so long, it was just, you kind of almost just forgot you hadn't DJ'd. So
Yeah.
the actual doing it part was quite easy, and I had a lot of tunes that I hadn't played that I wanted to play, so it was kind of more fun to have a big batch of tunes to play.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too bad. It was just yeah, I think it's more used to the sort of mental and physical part of being
Mm,
out of the game and kind of having to recondition yourself to
yeah.
just sort of do it. But it's all good. I mean, and then it's been up and down since then. We've had other breaks. There was the kind of sort of a lockdown, I think, after that, or was it? Yeah, it's almost been weird as well with bookings, because I think promoters have been worried about shows getting pulled. And
Mm.
then when the media says, oh, we're having this another wave of this, or there might be another lockdown, then it puts people off planning stuff.
Yeah.
So I know for other DJs I've spoken to, there've been weird patches where it was quiet for no reason.
Yeah.
But I think it just fell into the sort of news cycle and kind of, so it's still a bit patchy compared to like 3 or 4 years ago. But I think people feel positive. It's kind of on its way to get back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a very unique industry because it's not like a restaurant or a hotel you can just, or like a restaurant, I guess you can just open it and take bookings. And then if lockdown comes back in, you close back. Here, you're scheduling 6 months, whatever in advance. And as promoters, you're like, okay, I want to be 100% sure all of this isn't going to change next week before booking all these artists and venues and all that.
Yeah, that is the problem. It's just so far advanced.
Yeah.
And I don't know, as time's gone anyway, my kind of career, every year seems to get 2 months more in advance, if you know what I mean. But literally that same time next year, and it's bookings a year ahead or more, and it's nuts how far advanced everybody's got to beat everyone else to get that person locked in. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, like you said, it's really hard for promoters. I really feel for their situation because you've got to commit to stuff that's so far ahead and you don't know what's going to happen. I think punters as well probably are leaving it till like that week or that night to buy their ticket and be like, yeah, I'm not going to commit to that months ahead and then get, my ticket need refunding or not get a refund or whatever. So yeah, it's
I'm going back to my first rave this Friday. Since ever. I'm based in Belgium, so I'm going to Liquidity. They're having a Liquidity in Antwerp. So heading over there, and it's going to be weird because it's been so long. I'm kind of like anxious because I'm just not used to it anymore. But I know it's going to be.
That'll be busy. So it'll be from like nothing to 1,000 to, I don't know, what is it, 2,000-4,000?
It's the Tricks. So I don't know if you've been at Tricks before, but it's probably 1,200, 1,500, maybe something like that. So it's a concert venue. It's a big concert venue. I've seen plenty of like metal shows and stuff like that there. So it's a proper venue, but it's gonna be weird. I'm really looking forward to it, but at the same time, it's like it's been a long time.
And is that kind of restriction free now in Belgium for that kind of stuff?
100% restriction free. There's nothing left in Belgium besides wearing masks in public transport. That's it. Like all the rest is like no test or anything like to get in. It's just go ahead.
Right. So, cool. Well, that'll be a nice kind of change of scene.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to talk about Bristol, because I know you, I think you were living in London before moving to Bristol a number of years ago. I know Bristol is very tied to drum and bass history and one of the drum and bass capitals. I've never been to Bristol. How would you describe the scene or the mood or Bristol as a city for somebody like me who's never been there?
Well, like you said, I grew up in London and moved here when I was in my early 20s. And coming from London and hanging out in Bristol for a bit before we moved, to kind of answer your question, that's how, I kind of caught the vibe of the city and understood what it was like. And that's kind of what, made me want to move here was definitely back then. It's still the same now, but that was kind of, I'm trying to think when that was like 16 something years ago. It was definitely, you could just do what you wanted in terms of like, if you want to be a goth, you can do that. If you want to be a sort of hippie artist, you can do that. If you want to run your own business, you could sort of do that. And it was, obviously you can do all that in London, but it's just more of a struggle. And there's so much going on in London. It's a bit more kind of regimented or just hectic. And obviously there's so much other business in London that there's kind of less leeway for just stuff to sort of happen. Also back then we go around Bristol and be like, no one works. They're just like out, hanging out. Because it was so relatively cheap then. You could work 3 days a week and kind of get by
Oh shit.
on that kind of wage.
Yeah.
And again, that was really appealing because it was just more laid back. It wasn't this like 9 to 5, get on the tube every day, go to work kind of mission. So yeah, that I think lends itself well to creative jobs or creative outlets. So there was a lot of music, a lot of artwork, a lot of kind of culture stuff going on that, you know, was just really cool to see. And because it's smaller, everything's a bit more condensed, you know, as a size. It's just easy to get around. You can see things here and there. There's people that are easy to meet, and it's just a kind of yeah, I've always looked at it as like a borough of London, like a, you know, like a kind of one postcode of London. So you've kind of, it's that kind of size where you can almost just stay to that area and have everything you need in reach. And so, yeah, I think as time's gone on, that hasn't really changed. You know, it's the world's changed, and obviously like Bristol's moved with that, but I still think relatively to other cities, it's still pretty kind of chilled out, pretty creative, and there's a really good nightlife scene. So that again ties in with whether you're in a band or whether you're a singer or a DJ, there's lots of places you can perform, and a lot of punters that I think are up for going out for that kind of experience. So yeah, I think it lends itself well to our kind of industry. And I think, like people say on the DJ circuit, you get this triangle of like London, Manchester, Bristol as the kind of like three, not like main cities, but in a way they are the kind of three. And I think if you're a band from America or wherever touring, you do other cities as well. But those are kind of like three of the main cities culturally that always have a strong music scene. So I think, yeah, it's a good place to be for music. And for living. So yeah, I still love it up here.
Yeah. Did you ever consider moving, or because I guess you've traveled a lot around the world, or even in Europe or across the UK, but you've been so in Bristol for the last 16 years, you've said, never considered moving elsewhere?
I mean, I have, yeah. I mean, I've been to Thailand quite a lot, and each time you come back, you're like, why am I not living there? And I've known a few people that have lived there and moved there. So it's kind of, it can be done, but it's a lot to do, especially somewhere that far, just with like family, friends, uprooting everything. Maybe if you were just kind of in your early 20s and single and you just wanted like a year away, it would kind of be easier to do that. But where you've got everything sort of set up here, it's a big deal. But I don't know, it's I would be open to moving abroad. It's just because I'm half like too lazy to sort it out.
It is a huge decision, huge commitment to move long term. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I'd love to wake up to a sunshine and a beach. You know, that would be wicked.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Unfortunately, the UK isn't the prime spot for sunsets and.
That's it. So yeah, maybe one day I can retire. You know,
join Goldie in Thailand.
Yeah, I know. I'm jealous.
Yeah. But I get what you mean. I don't know if like moving to Bristol was a hard step for you or not. But I know I was living in Hong Kong for the last 2 years, and moving from Brussels to Hong Kong was a huge step. Like it's a massive change, and I was there with my wife. We stayed there 2 years, and that was pretty much as long as I could like take it, and we had to go back to Europe because it's culturally it's so different, it's so far away, you're away from friends, family, culturally everything's different, and either some people thrive in being in those types of environments that are completely different. And some others like us were like, okay, 2 years is enough. We need to get back to proper raves in Europe. And
you didn't meet her in Hong Kong?
No, not at all. We'd been together for a number of years already. No, luckily, because I know she has friends that met like in Australia or Mexico, like with a local. And then it's like, okay, what do we do now?
Stay in your place or come back to my place?
Yeah.
No, and that's kind of what I thought often with Thailand was just like, no matter, you're sort of still an outsider in that sense, and
Yeah.
it's, you almost feel like a kind of long-term tourist or something. And I'm sure you get into the, you know, the community once you move in, but it's yeah, it's just a kind of, I've never done it, to be honest with you. So yeah, I kind of don't know, but yeah, moving here wasn't too hard, because you're like, it's 2 hours on the motorway.
Mm.
And it's, everyone speaks the same language and it's pretty much the same deal, but it's just yeah, but I've got no experience of what you've done, so it does sound exciting, but it's yeah, it's a lot to handle, isn't it, really?
Yeah. But yeah, so just stay on that. I do want to. I've read a ton of interviews of you preparing for this chat, and most of them revolve around like recent projects or stuff like that, but not so many about like your early days, how you actually got into music, drum and bass, and that's what I'm really interested in. So
Yeah,
starting at the top, what's your like earliest memory of music?
of any music.
Yeah.
Probably of solid memories. You know, I had piano lessons pretty young as a kid. So that's probably when I first, in terms of, I probably got memories of hearing music, but in terms of actually sort of doing anything musical, can't remember the exact age, but probably something like 6 or 7. I think I was having piano lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the kind of first taste of actually sort of doing it yourself. And I think, you know, quite early on had a few other instruments to sort of pick up and play. And yeah, it's weird. As you say that, you kind of start trying to remember your childhood, and you're like, I can't remember like a lot of it.
Yeah.
So
did you grow up in a very like musical household? Like, was there a lot of music around, or your parents played any instruments?
a little bit. They both played a little bit of guitar. I think my mum played flute for a bit, but it wasn't a massively musical house. They were both into music and had a lot of records and kind of, you know, listened to music. But yeah, they're not musicians. It wasn't like a kind of music house particularly. But I think one of my dad's best mates was him and his wife were both in like of the symphonic or philharmonic orchestra, and they were proper musicians, and they were like, yeah, get him piano lessons, because that's the best instrument to kind of learn overall. Whereas I think they were cellists, and, you know, other instruments, they were like, yeah, if you play the piano, you've kind of, it covers all bases in that sense. So I'm kind of glad I learned that rather than violin or something that's quite specific and is mono, essentially. You can't, it's not polyphonic with chords, so you don't have that quite same harmonic kind of background. So I think guitar and piano are probably like the best two to learn first. And I did then play a load of other instruments at school. I did like a bit of trumpet and horns for a bit, and what else, a bit of guitar, but never was quite that good at guitar. And I wish now I'd actually spent more time. I wish I could play guitar better, because that's something that I'd love to just be able to put those licks in myself and just, you know, play it well, because it's such a great instrument. But it just, I think my feet are too fat, basically, or something.
Well, it's never too late. There's plenty of people that pick up guitar later on.
I did that actually in lockdown. I bought, because I can play a bit of bass, and I'm kind of a bit better at bass due to the fat fingers. I bought another bass and was like, right, I'm going to learn bass in lockdown. And then like everything, like a month later, you kind of, you know, lost the momentum. And that's these things, it does require a lot of practice. And especially once you're this old, you just don't have the time or that kind of mindset. I think as a kid, it is easier. So that was why I was quite lucky to get a bit of background from the piano. And when I was kind of a teenager, I switched to a jazz piano teacher. And so that helped me just learn that whole style and learn about jazz in general, which I still love and is a big kind of, just kind of part of my background in music. Those are sort of early memories. And obviously actually the drums was a whole big other thing. So when I was probably about 12, I got the first drum kit. and we moved house, and the people next door had a baby, and they couldn't deal with the drumming, so I had a tiny little window, like 7 to 70 or something, like drum in, and had some of those drum pads you can put on there, like practice pads, but it's so disappointing to hit them. It's just like a little dead thud, and you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
So I love playing the drums, and I never really got long enough to really just smash it out for years on the drums, which I would have loved. And still now I've got a drum kit in the garage that I've never had a chance to really set up. And I'd love to have a studio where I could have those kind of instruments set up where you can just go in and play, because obviously drums is a big part of my job now.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. And there's something I come from a bit like you, more classical, like learning piano and then moving to guitar when I was a kid. And there's something very liberating about being able to just jam on a piano or a guitar that you just don't get at least I don't get in electronic music production, because you can't really jam like with samples. I guess you could do with like a synth, but then it becomes like a piano, I guess. But having a real instrument and just like playing along and noodling around, something very liberating about it.
And you're right, that's what I used to do with the piano. And the teacher I had, I'd say, I don't really sort of like that note. Can I play this one? And it's, you can't do that. You have to play everything that's written on the paper. And that's why he recommended. He's like, I think you need to get a jazz teacher, because you can play other stuff. But like you said, I just sit there and kind of jam, and kind of didn't really know what I was doing back then, because all I'd known was learning the things, but I wasn't that great at sight reading. Some people can just sit and just play like that and just read it, and I could sort of do it, but it wasn't really my thing. So like you said, having that liberty to kind of just to jam out was definitely and that's kind of what's fun about drums and guitar. Once you get into more band music, it's just you can jam with a few mates, and it's pretty cool.
Is there stuff either from your jazz lessons or drums, guitar, piano that you've kind of carried on to your like current production music that you produce?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sadly, with the jazz thing, I kind of never got massively better than probably my last lesson then. Obviously, I've learned a lot of stuff since I've taught myself, but and same with the classical stuff. I think I probably got to about grade 7 and then it just dropped off. So you're kind of like this thing where you're like, you were better as a kid technically, but the drums I think also really helped to just know what drums sound like in real life. And that's what drew me to the drums originally, was just hearing the drums in a hallway, or like in a kind of in a school kind of concert or something. You're like, wow, those drums just sound sick in a room. And I think just playing drums and knowing how they react and kind of what the feel should be like, that's definitely just come through all my music, and why I'm not mad about like synthetic drums. I definitely use a bit of that, but I love the sound of real drums, and I know other drummers who've been through that whole journey as well, of like, okay, I'm getting all synth drums doing this thing, and it's just, you can't beat a really good sounding drum kit when it's done right. So I think that's kind of played through. And then obviously the kind of just general music background of all the music I grew up listening to, and that's all still influenced my drum and bass stuff. And that's often a subject that comes up in interviews and with other producers and label people that I talk to, is how drum and bass used to more so be about the stuff you grew up with. And obviously jungle, a lot of it was people's parents had reggae, dancehall, all that kind of stuff coming into it, jazz, hip hop, all those samples were like a massive part of jungle. And we often say like some of the new people may have only really listened to drum and bass before they then make and put out drum and bass. Whereas probably a lot of those guys who were ahead of me, they'd grown up on hip hop and jazz and reggae, and kind of I had, but it was more 90s than kind of 70s or 80s stuff. But yeah, I think that's something I'm really kind of just into as a thing, is that influence of other music so important.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
relevant.
I guess it's tricky for like newcomers now because drum and bass has been around for
That's
25,
it.
30 years. So you can't just uninvent it, you know?
Yeah,
So if you're a
yeah,
fan of the music and you've been listening to drum and bass for 10 years and then you start producing it, I can see how it can be hard to kind of avoid that and like forget that you've heard it and try to bring in other influences, which was easier when drum and bass was emerging.
you're right. Yeah. And still, even for me, you know, I kind of got into it in the kind of mid 90s. So even by that point, when I was pretty young, it was pretty well established anyway. So kind of, um, yeah. But like you said, especially now, like if you're, I can't do the maths, but like you said, if you're 20 now, it already been around for 15 years,
Yeah.
20 years anyway. So yeah, but it's not a bad thing, because I think a lot of people wouldn't realize that a lot of the stuff they're hearing is a sample of that or influenced by that, and it kind of comes round as like a third generation
Yeah.
sample or influence, and it kind of gets in your head some other way. And but I'm sure there's also loads of people now that do have a really wide music taste that make drum and bass, and there's loads of other genres now that didn't exist then that might influence their stuff. So that's really cool as well. And I think you do hear that with newer D&B, where there's deep house elements, or like, you know, neo soul stuff, or kind of dubstep kind of elements that have kind of come in. So yeah, I'm sure it still happens a lot.
Yeah, or stuff like obviously techno has been huge for a number of years, and some artists are incorporating what you typically hear in techno, which then I love because I'm a huge fan of techno as well. And when I get the two of those in a drum and bass track, it's like, oh yeah, perfect.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, no, there's so much, and that's kind of always been the appeal of drum and bass, is like you can. And you even think, there was that whole heavy metal thing probably in the early 2000s. It's kind of like anything you're into, you can, you know, Marky and people like that from South America put all the, you know, samba elements in. So whatever you want, you can kind of throw it into D&B and it probably works somehow.
yeah, definitely. So just going back to your like upbringing and all that. So how did you move from instruments to? Was your path into electronic music with DJing, or was it production straight off?
It was a bit of both, and it's kind of like hilariously sort of naive and kind of like just so different to now. So I mean, I first started with various like keyboards that had sequencers on them that you could make sequences with, and I'd record them to a 4-track tape recorder, which you could then double up and overdub other stuff onto. And that was kind of sort of making, not tunes, but it was just learning. I didn't even know what I was doing. So this is like, in general, there's no like YouTube tutorials.
Yeah.
I didn't go to college, and I was probably like 15 sort of doing this kind of stuff, 14, 15. So you're kind of just getting whatever equipment you can find at a secondhand shop, or my dad gave me the 4-track, and there's a few little things like that where you kind of mess around with stuff. And then I think then I got a sound module and Cubasis, which was like the kind of, it's kind of like light, you know, like Ableton Light or whatever. It was the sort of light version of Cubase. So then I learned how to program MIDI with a sound module and kind of make tunes, but there was no samples or kind of mixing desk or any of that stuff. And then when I got the sampler, which actually is just that little guy there.
Yeah.
Yes, I 4000. That was suddenly like, wow, I can sample any clip. I think you had 16 megabytes of space, but you had to be pretty selective. And if you had a long pad, that was your game done. Do you know what I mean?
Was that sampling from vinyl or?
And again, just hilariously, like my sister's CD collection, or just I'd go through everything in the house, just go through every CD, go to secondhand shops. So it was vinyl, CDs, tapes, whatever kind of was there. And at that point, I didn't really have any mates that were doing this stuff, so I didn't have a clue really what I was doing. And then I had one mate at school who did kind of know what he was doing, and he'd show me the samplers, and we had another little sampler called an SU10, which is I think it's by Yamaha, and it's like a little touchpad, almost like a kind of mini MPC. And you could touch in stuff with your fingers, and it had a little ribbon which you could scratch, kind of like vinyl scratching with it. And that was the first thing I ever chopped an Amen up on. And once I could, and I think it even had like a kind of like a latch mode, so you could kind of hit the buttons and kind of get an Amen jamming in time. And to do that was just like, wow. I can make those tunes now. I've got this Amen, I can loop it up, I can rewind bits, you can do all that stuff. So yeah, so with that, once I got that emu, I probably made like 100 tunes that have never come out, which we were all just learning what you were doing. And there was some pretty good stuff there. And probably one of the later ones was then the first one that A-Sides signed to Eastside, which was my first release. And I took my sampler up to his studio, and we kind of ran the bits through some of his gear and kind of made it sound a little bit more, you know, proper studio-y. So yeah, it was a slow transition, but you know, that one mate of mine at school, a guy called Marek, you know, he kind of showed me a lot of equipment and kind of just production things that his dad, he was from a more kind of technical musical background, so he kind of knew about samplers and hard disk recorders and all these kind of stuff and jungle and that kind of stuff. And then when I met Silent Witness, Dan, who was it's probably when I was about 18, he was another person who showed me, you need to get a Mackie mixing desk. That's kind of what everyone's doing drum and bass on. And his compressors, and he kind of, I was still on Cubase. I think he showed me Logic. And when I saw Logic, I was like, right, that's what I've been waiting for. So I was instantly banging to Logic. And yeah, from then it's kind of more or less the same stuff now, just a little bit more, you know, experience. But yeah, once I got into Logic and had a mixing desk, it was sort of, yeah, I was in.
And so was it drum and bass from the start when you started like doing sampling and putting tunes together? Was it drum and bass like first love and you stuck to it, or?
Yes and no. So actually, like you said originally in the question, DJing was actually kind of what I wanted to do, was be a scratch DJ as well. So I was fiddling around with those little tunes and the sound modules, but also I'd seen scratching and all the DMC championships, and that's what I was, and I was more into hip hop as music then. I'd heard jungle and had a few tapes, but really I was well into hip hop. And so yeah, I got decks to do scratching and really got into all the turntablism stuff for a while. And so I made hip hop beats and then sort of jungle kind of stuff. So they kind of went hand in hand. And also I was buying house, garage, and jungle. Those were like the three things I was mainly buying, and hip hop scratch records. That was what my record collection was. And then at some point you were like, I've got X amount of money to buy records with, and I'm buying half garage, half drum and bass. I've got to commit to one or the other. And I always wonder if I made the right choice, because I love garage still as much, almost, as I love drum and bass. And I had to pick one. And yeah, I went with drum and bass, and then just started buying those records more. So yeah, I've always made other stuff, and still throughout this whole drum and bass journey, I've always made other stuff on the side. But drum and bass was one of my, you know, main passions, and it went pretty well. So I kind of rolled out.
Yeah, definitely. That actually ties into a question that I had from Patreon. Harry was asking what were your other projects, or your current other projects outside of Break? I know you have Degrees of Freedom.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing. Originally it was Degrees of Freedom, and we had so much, that's mainly me and Kyo, that's our project. And we met years ago making that kind of music and drum and bass. And that was a whole side project we've had on the go in the background of the drum and bass. And there were so many different genres, we decided to split it to the Degrees and then Degrees of Freedom. So Degrees of Freedom now is just like more like house stuff. and then the Degrees is more soul, trip hop kind of stuff. And we've had releases out this year and last year from both of those sort of simultaneously. And we had a couple of things out in the past as well on a few other labels. And, you know, even at one point, Degrees of Freedom was we had a reggae tune out.
Okay.
So it's kind of just been other music. We never quite kind of
freedom.
And yeah, well, and that was the kind of idea. But it's every time we did these things and approached labels, it was like no one kind of was really getting the multi-genre thing. And I get it from running a label. It's pretty hard to market it unless you're as famous enough to be able to get away with it. But when you're a new band, being like, hey, here's reggae, house and disco and soul, people are just kind of like, so we often had that advice of like, you need to kind of focus the sound in certain directions to make it a bit more cohesive. And I think it's good advice, but it's hard to do that when you've got so much other music you want to make.
Yeah. So would that be your main side project at the moment, or do you have any other musical projects going on?
That's kind of mainly it. I mean, I've got a load of house and sort of hip hop beats that I just kind of do on my own, and same thing, just don't quite get around to getting them all out there. I'll often send little demos out. I did a tune recently for Carousel for his hip hop album, and that was cool just to kind of get another tune out from a different genre. And I said to him and other guys, yeah, I'd love to do more of that. It's just kind of balancing the time, excuse me, to get that done. And same with the house stuff. I've got, you know, loads of house tunes, but it's just breaking into a whole new genre is tough.
Yeah.
And it's the same for me as any new drum and bass artist. You're just starting at the bottom and no one wants to know, and it's kind of tricky. And it's competitive, and house is just so much even more competitive and big. It's a tough game. So but I enjoy making it, so that's kind of where it all you realize, I've got all this music, I should kind of do something with it. But it's
well, it's like
it's there.
it's there, and you have to do it first for yourself, and that's the most important. So but I can see how building the Break brand for so many years, you don't really want to start from zero again with another project under another name, especially in scenes which are pretty much any scene is probably bigger than drum and bass, like house or hip hop or whatever. So it's going to be that much harder. So
I know. Yeah, no, that's it. So I've dabbled in quite a few. I did some trap and that kind of stuff with another mate during lockdown, and that was kind of interesting to get into. So I like kind of working on anything, but it's but it always ends up, you know, kind of, it always circles back to D&B. And at least with that one, I know I can make the tunes and get them out. So at least that bit of it can be satisfying.
Yeah. You mentioned your own label, Symmetry, and I do want to touch on it quickly because I think you've been running it for about 15 years now. What did I say in the intro? Like 2006, 2007 that you launched it. So first of all, congrats on running a label for 15 years. But
running.
Well, managing, running, whatever. What would you say was like your biggest learning, or your biggest learning launching and running a label for the past 15 years?
I've never been asked that. I think it's like a double-edged sword of like, it's easier and harder than you thought.
Okay.
So when I launched it, it was around a time where everyone had kind of figured out, oh, you don't have to just sign everything to this label, give them half the money, and you could just do it yourself. And a few guys like A-Sides, Clute, Marcus Intellects, they were quite like open and helpful, explaining to me how to do things, and were like, oh, you want to speak to this distributor, and here's an artwork guy we know. And so it was nice for those guys who were even signing my music to say, you can do that as well yourself, and you should probably do it, because you've got so much music. It will just allow you to have an output for it and have creative control over it. And that's why, yeah, for some little time, it was just my tunes coming out on the label. And maybe it would have made everything easier if I'd just kept it like that. I don't know whether Calibre had anyone else on Signature, or whether it is just him the whole way through.
I feel it's just him, but I'm not familiar with every single release.
Someone will know. I know he's probably had collabs on there, but that was something. It would have been cool to have sort of done that.
Yeah.
But where I've struggled with it over the years is kind of, are we going for something that's in the same space competitively as Critical or Dispatch or Shogun or whoever, and you building up this roster of artists, doing big label nights, putting out 20 whatever 30 releases a year, but every time I get into that game, then I become some like label guy, and it's just not my thing. And I love, I'd still rather run a record label than loads of other jobs, but it just doesn't fall naturally to me. And then you find that it takes so much effort and time. Your year would just get sucked away releasing everyone else's music, which isn't kind of why I started it. So that's kind of been the learning curve, I guess, is like, how much time do you put into other people? And we've always been at a point where it's not big enough, where like Hospital and people like that have been able to hire a whole office full of staff. I'd love to kind of have that, where I could just have an expert in marketing dealing with that, and have a really good accounting guy, whatever, doing, and everyone, it runs like a company. But again, you've either got to take on a load of debt and loans to be able to do that, which is too risky for a drum bass label for me. So it's a tricky thing with a D&B label, because like you said, it is a pretty small scene. So to get a label to earning, kind of a big turnover is pretty hard, because there's not much money out there to get hold of. So that's kind of the challenge, is just how much do you dedicate to other people and kind of the label as a label, or whether it's just an outlet for your own music. And that's the kind of balance to juggle a little bit.
I can see how it's tricky, because you can always do more with a label. You can do more releases, you can promote more, you can do more nights, you can do more of everything. And at what point do you draw the line of, okay, I'm going to do this much, and that's enough. Like, we don't need to do more.
No. Yeah, no, you're right. That sums it up well. Yeah.
So why did you launch a second label then?
I mean, so essentially it was probably because me and Total Science had done so many swaps, we lost track of who owed who what.
Okay.
And it kind of started going like that. And sometimes it hasn't really happened, because none of the tunes have massively been bigger or smaller than others. But it could be that thing where, you got that tune and that one did better than this tune, and we've been left with that tune. So in a way, we kind of thought, split it all down the middle, and then everybody kind of gets an equal split of the tunes. They can all go in one place. And I think, during lockdown, we were making more music together anyway, and we thought, we got more tunes in the works. We love making tunes together, and they always come out really cool. And we kind of just thought it would was like an idea that, where you're like, let's do that, and then it just sort of happened. And it's kind of fun. So I think it's and I think, again, an original idea was, this is just going to be for our collabs. So it wasn't like, hey, we're starting a new label that's going to be this other it's more just like, that's a little thing for a limited edition side project, I guess. So we'll see what happens, but it's a cool little extra avenue to have.
I'm just curious on what you mentioned, because I'm not really familiar with like the royalty side of music. So you're not automatically both of you guys like signed to, not signed, but like receiving royalties from every collab that you're doing. Sometimes it's only you or them.
So actually, I mean, it's a good question. What we've done in the past, and I've done it with a lot of other producers, is let's say it's Total Science. They'll do a tune with me for Symmetry, and I keep everything, and then I do a tune with them for CIA, and they keep everything.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
it's literally just an even swap. But that was kind of my point, was like, if they did a tune with me for Symmetry and that blew up and sold loads, they would have kind of got shafted on that swap.
Yeah.
Which hasn't really ever happened massively, and it kind of is like what goes around comes around, and it balances out naturally somewhat. But yeah, that's I've had, and sometimes people do that with remixes, so it might be the case where I'll do, you know, Total Science a remix, and then they'll do me a remix, and you swap a remix for each other, and that just saves anyone having to cough up a remix fee and vice versa. Which I know kind of balances out eventually, but and it's also kind of nice when creatively you don't have to talk about money.
Yeah.
Like, right, we'll just swap these. That's it, done. Conversation, and especially when you got mates and you got to do a whole conversation about money and splits, and it can be like a bit of a downer on the whole thing. So yeah, with quite a lot of people I work with, we've done swaps, but there can be a point where swaps just become either this history, you just like can't remember where you're at in the list of swaps.
You do have to keep track of like how many remixes you've done for certain labels and how much they've done for you, or like at least have a rough idea, or else it's unmanageable.
This is it. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. But other than that, normally it would just be, anyone that I work with, generally it's just a 50-50 where you split 50-50, 5-25 between each artist on the collab.
And so Try Audio is mostly for just your collabs at this stage, at least.
At this stage, yeah.
Just like Symmetry at the start, and then.
Well, yeah, I know. It might be nicer just to keep that locked in, but I know that both of us, still now we get sent a lot of demos. We definitely don't have time for them. That kind of circles back to that issue I had of like, if I was to put a tune out from every artist that sent me a good demo, there probably wouldn't be time for my tunes, or vice versa. If I put a load of my tunes out, I couldn't really sign anyone else. And I had looked at doing another label before, as a smaller imprint of Symmetry for all the other stuff, and maybe kept Symmetry for more myself and any other bigger artists, and then some of the newcomers, kind of how you got Program and Ram or whatever. We had looked at that, but again, it's just a ton more work, and it's then again, you like, now I'm running 2 labels, which is even more of that work that isn't quite what I sort of signed up for. So we ever kind of like win the lottery and have the cat, then I definitely have a bunch of labels going on. But and you want to pay people if they're going to work for you. This is how do you pay someone 30 grand a year in drum and bass? It's like,
there's only I've no idea about the financial side of labels, but I'm pretty sure there's only a handful of labels in drum and bass that can manage it. Like, I can't see more. Really.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But just closing off on Symmetry and talk about the demos that you receive. I guess you receive like a ton of demos. What's one, I'd say, common issue or something that you notice like often in demos that makes you think, I can't sign this? Or
well, firstly, when it's like hilarious sort of EDM dubstep or something, where you're like, have you even heard what this label is?
Yeah, okay.
But they're just blanket sending their tune out to literally every record label on the internet. That could be what it is.
Yeah.
Those ones are just sort of funny, but it kind of gets annoying when you're just like, because we want to go through everything. It's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't send my tunes to like a techno label. It's just like, there's not that many of them, but they're quite funny where you just go through and you're like, how is this? And it's a minor one. And actually a guy, I won't say who he is, sent me some tunes today, put his name and his email on the tune. And you're like, yes. It makes just so much difference when you've got a folder of stuff or whatever, just to have that link. And sometimes it might just say track 1, and then that goes in a folder and you're like, who the hell is this? What is this tune? So just labeling it properly is a good thing. And I think as it goes on now, we kind of probably feel that a downloadable SoundCloud is probably the best thing for a demo, because you can have the artwork there. You can click on the link; it will keep working. It doesn't lock you out or time out like a WeTransfer link. It's a bit, you can download it. So I kind of think probably it's easiest just to send a downloadable SoundCloud, because then it's all the info's there, and you could leave your email in the comments or have a link. So yeah, that's kind of the easiest way to do it. But if people label their tracks right, that's fine. So it's nothing exciting but simple. And then it's, like you're probably saying, it's just going through the tunes and seeing if they're good enough or if they suit the label. And then that's the kind of A&R-y kind of part of it.
Yeah. And is there any like common, because I know you're also mastering, are you a mastering engineer? Can I say that? Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I can try and flag it.
Is there...
No, I do a bit of that work,
Yeah. So is, in terms of, I guess, more mixing, or like, is there common issues that you hear, like, okay, too much bass, or I don't know, not enough space in the mix, or like stuff that you often hear that people should pay attention to?
I think it just varies from person to person, and I know I've been through that. Sometimes, like you said, someone might have a good overall mix, but it's just too bassy. And often now I kind of probably think that person's probably pretty good, but their speakers aren't that bassy. So that's why they put too much bass in everything, or vice versa. It could be all really toppy and you're like, oh, maybe they've just got quite dull speakers, which is what I used to have. So that's sometimes an issue, but that's not a big thing, because if you've got a really good balance mix, then all you've got to do in mastering is just balance it up one way, then everything's still relatively good. I guess in terms of bad mixes, which is all subjective, but in my opinion, where there's a super loud hi-hat and then a really quiet snare, just things that are all over the shop, relatively balanced level wise, that's like an obvious issue that kind of you just spot straight away. But yeah, it's a tough one. Where it's the most difficult part of that demo process is where there's a good tune, but the productions or engineering's not quite there. And you get other tunes that are like perfectly, really well engineered, but you're like, oh, it's just a bit generic or bland, and there's nothing like stand out about the tune. It just ticks a few boxes, but it's just like meh. And then you might get another tune which has got a wicked bass line or cool sample or just a good melody, something, but you're like, oh, the productions are way off. I'm going to have to really, kind of coach that person or do a few versions, and it's a whole mission. And again, then that draws back to that thing of like, am I an artist and repertoire guy trying to sort of, develop an artist and their technique and their sound, or do you, ideally you just want that perfect, tune that's mixed well, like a track, and there are people that send those, and we're like, yes, that's the ones you want. But yeah, it's a tricky one, because there's artists where you can really hear with a little bit of work, they, a bit of help or guidance, they could really be good. And I do like that, because I really, there was loads of times where I could have used that help. And sometimes I got it and sometimes I didn't. But to be able to give that back to people, where you can just see a few quick fixes as well, where you're like, oh, if you just did this, that, and that, you'd be 30% better overnight. And it's quite nice to be able to sort of offer that to people.
Do you prefer receiving like a track with like great vibe but low quality, quote unquote, mix down, or a perfectly mixed track but the vibe's kind of lacking, there isn't much spirit in it?
Well, like I said, both.
Yeah.
The problem, the sad reality is, maybe back in the day a bit more, you could have got away with the first one you said. Stuck it on vinyl, it would have come out sounding a bit better, because the production level is so good now. Putting out a not that well produced tune, it's just not, I'm not gonna probably play it, because it's not gonna stand up in a club to the rest of my set. That probably applies to other DJs, and that's the tough bit, is you've just got to be really good at engineering and production and songwriting at the same time, because other people are too. So it's just, the level's just gone up, and that's great, but it does mean that like the ones you've described just might not quite make it, because it doesn't tick all the boxes.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword because you do have to have the vibe in the track and the spirit in it, but the quality, the production quality has to be spot on. Otherwise, it doesn't get played and nobody hears it.
I know.
Yeah,
But there is a lot of music that sounds good but isn't that good, if you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah,
That's yeah, it goes both ways.
yeah, yeah,
And again, maybe with those guys, you could say, "Oh, your production's great. If you just did this, that, and that with an arrangement or as an idea, sometimes you could help that person in that way." And you could say that's probably a quicker way to get a result, because in some ways the engineering stuff is almost like they're both different things to learn. But if a tune sounds good and it just needs a few tweaks, you might get a good result quite quickly out of that.
yeah. But how would you say to someone, yeah, there isn't any vibe in your track, learn vibe? Like, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, you got to be diplomatic. It's,
Yeah. Yeah,
easy, basically.
yeah. I'm gonna slowly wrap it up. You've already been super generous with your time, and I know
No,
you're.
that's fine. Yeah, roll out. I'm here. So if you got more to ask, I'm happy to do it. While we're
Yeah. Well, I don't want to abuse you either, but I do want to touch on social media because I mentioned it at the top, and it's not a common feature, let's say today, of somebody who's just not on social media or kind of refuses to play the social media game. So I'm quite curious, like, where does it come from for you? Like, not having a Facebook page, not really posting on Instagram, except for your label, but like personal stuff. Is it kind of a philosophical like refusal, or is it more like can't be bothered with all that stuff, or where does it come
both.
from?
So one of the initial things that wound me up was when like the Arctic Monkeys got signed, and if you even remember them now, but
I do, yeah, I love their stuff, yeah. But I don't remember the. Yeah.
Well, they were basically not like the first, but they were like the MySpace band. Now, obviously, they weren't. They were just a really good band. But the kind of spin at the time was they've been signed because of MySpace, or that just MySpace was all part of that thing. And that's where kind of almost that sort of social media started. Obviously, there was lots of other platforms as well, but especially with music, that idea of like, if you get your stuff on MySpace, you might get signed. Or it's kind of almost like if you've got loads of hits on MySpace, that will be appealing to a record label. That's more the bit that sort of pissed me off, because it's this thing of like popularity and traction being like a signal for the quality of the music. Or of the kind of merit of that artist and whether they deserve. And obviously, so many of these things have been going on anyway before social media, because record labels and PR people used the media in that way to hype up stuff that wasn't that good, but just, sold it. So it's nothing new really. But when I saw that thing with, and just the way the media spanned that Arctic Monkey thing, I was like, oh, this is just a pretty bad like road it's going down, and everyone's going to now be trying to sell their thing on this like forum to kind of get signed, or that's going to be the way in, which is kind of cool if it happens for you, I guess. But that's when you then started seeing this thing of like, oh, we're going to book that artist because they got 50,000 Facebook followers, or you need to do more stuff to get your followers up. And interestingly, like that, I reckon, had its peak as a kind of mindset probably like almost like 10 years ago, maybe. And it definitely isn't a thing as much now, like said out loud. It obviously still happens, but people were specifically mentioning numbers. You've got to have X number of followers for us to be interested. Or
okay.
I've even seen flyers. They weren't me, but some other artists I know have shown flyers that had the Facebook followers after each artist.
That is like so cringy. I've never seen that.
Yeah. And so that was like a while back, before kind of even like Instagram existed, when it was more like Facebook and then a bit of Twitter, or like MySpace before that. And so I just knew from the start, I was like, oh, this is a really bad road, and it's going to apply to everything, not just music. And then it tied into this idea of like, I'm going to get my whole family's photo collection and just leave that out on the street for everyone to look through. Like, I just never do that. I don't get why you want people looking through your kids' photos, or what. It's just creepy. Yeah. So or the angle of like, yeah, I'm now a celebrity in Heat magazine on my sort of super low budget version of that.
Yeah.
Kind of cringe. So yeah, I just avoided it for like a number of reasons, and kind of also with music, just kind of seen so many of my mates and colleagues getting wrapped up in it and wasting time stressing about it. X number of years later, they'll be like, yeah, I've quit Twitter, my life's so much better. And you're like, I've been trying to tell you that for 10 years. So I just kind of thought, I'm not going to get involved. It's not really my thing. And things like this is what I'd rather do. If it's an official or just like a proper interview with a journalist or someone who knows what they're doing, it's like I'd rather do that than just self-promote my thing for the sake of it or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's tough now because I know it is a reality of the world, and that's why we had to get the label, on Facebook and Instagram, because it's like, well, obviously everyone's seeing that. If you want to promote an event or a release, it is an outlet of media, and that kind of part of it I'm not massively against, in terms of like, we would have put an advert out on radio, we would have had a bit in a magazine.
Yeah.
So
it's the logical continuation of that.
Yeah, of media, and I'm not massively fussed about that. I think it's just the whole, and you can see now, I guess it's even happening, all the stuff I kind of thought would happen, where it's like people are committing suicide because they're so depressed because they got bullied because of this, and all that kind of stuff is coming up now, which took like 10 plus years for people to really see the negative side of it. But yeah, and it kind of sounds like people are always saying Facebook's kind of on the way out. And obviously something else will always like take over. But I'm hoping that maybe this generation, I always felt when it was at its peak, the people that were really pushing on it were the people that were like 10, 15 years older than me, that thought that's what the kids are into. We need to push it on there, if you know what I mean. And and I kind of feel now most younger people, they've grown up with it. They're not that impressed like in that. Obviously they all do it and it's just part, but it's almost just like that's what happens.
Yeah.
This new thing we've all got to be part of, everybody jump on the bandwagon. It's just sort of there, and it's part of like promotional media or like fun for people, and it's not like the new thing to jump on. So I think it's lost a bit of that hype in that sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely, like, I wouldn't want to speak for like younger people. I'm 30, so I have no idea what kids actually do today, but I do feel there's less value at least put on number of followers and things like that. Like that whole phase I think has gone by, because now it's just this normal thing of, yeah, everybody's on this Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, and it's just this thing that you do, and unless you have like 2 million followers, anything below is like just whatever, I think. But
yeah, and I kind of think from everything I've looked at, it kind of is just an element of, it's kind of like anything, to be like a YouTuber with whatever 50 million subscribers, you got to be good at what you do, but there is that element of sort of just luck and right place, right time. You put out the right content that just ticked with people, and they jumped, and it's just like being a famous actor or somewhere else. There's loads of actors that are just as good as whoever, but they didn't just get that role at the right time and just made it. So I kind of think as well, people probably see it like that now, that there's only a handful of people that go massive. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm interested to see what happens with stuff, and even the recent little kind of Twitter things going on with
Elon
Musk, and whether it goes private, and when I just seen the actual main shareholders of it with these like 0.04% kind of stake, and you realize I always knew that's been run by just big corporations, and it's getting steered by people that want a narrative to go a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there've been a bunch of those documentaries as well. I'm trying to remember what they're called, but all the stuff with the voting in America and here, and how the targeted, ads for voting and all the political stuff, and
Cambridge stuff,
all that stuff. It's all the kind of stuff I kind of, and when I saw that, I was like, wow, this is way worse than I thought it would ever be. It's so nuts, the AI kind of element of it. So it's pretty mad.
And we probably don't even know half of it, even with all those documentaries coming out. It's like the actual social engineering that goes behind making
Mm,
people. I heard this argument recently of like you get warnings on packs of cigarettes and alcohol of like this makes you addicted, this is dangerous for your health, and we all agree that that's a good idea to have those warning
right.
signs, but you don't have anything on like Instagram and Facebook when you open them up, but it is
Mm,
engineered to make you addicted. Like that's like a
I'm,
proof, there's proof of
yeah.
that, so it's
No, you're right. It's a good point, and I reckon you're right. Probably within 5-10 years, that will be a, which
yeah,
will be, but it will probably be like a software. I agree. Disclaimer that everyone just clicks and doesn't
probably, yeah,
ever.
and then we're done.
So just to cover their back. But yeah, and that's the weird thing is that I was literally there from the kind of beginning of the internet. I had a super early modem, and I kind of love the whole idea of a lot of it. So I'm not like anti-technology or the internet or anything like that. And I've done online gaming from way back in the day when it was just starting and all that kind of stuff, and seen all that change. But yeah, that for me, social media wasn't like a massive um, improvement on anything. It was
Mm.
just like AOL Messenger with sort of pictures or whatever. It wasn't like that amazingly new. So I was kind of like, nah, we did all that in like the late 90s, basically.
Yeah, yeah. With all of that said, do you ever regret not being on Instagram or Facebook? Like, is there any part of you sometimes that thinks it would make my life easier to be there and promote my music and stuff like that?
I wouldn't say it would have made my life easier, but it may have made me more known or popular or sold more units, possibly just because, like we said, that's the world we live in. And I would have probably got more followers and got higher DJ fees, maybe.
Mm.
But I always knew there'll be a cost to that. And that applies to just kind of similar things with like signing to another label. I could have maybe signed to a bigger drum and bass label at certain points, but then there's a yin and yang with that of like a give and take.
Yeah.
Um, and I personally would rather maybe end up at the point I was in now than constantly selfieing and sort of bigging up events for people and doing all that stuff just to maybe have got
10%
30%,
more, yeah.
10% more fee, or maybe it could have gone like you said some other way, and I'd be like the biggest guy on YouTube or something. But I'm not really that kind of guy, and I wouldn't have been saying like
Yeah.
and subscribe every 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Done it.
at what cost as well? Because I know from being, I wasn't on Instagram at all before I started like producing music, and when I launched this podcast, I went kind of heavy on Instagram and all that. And if I could do without it, I probably would. But when you start
Of
today, there
course.
isn't really a way. But
No.
it takes a lot of mental energy, even unconsciously, of comparing posts and is this
Mm,
post more successful than this one and stuff like
no.
that. And that it's a real cost of being on social media, if you
Yeah.
realize it or not.
No, it is. So it's like you said, it's a kind of yin yang slippery slope thing. But I kind of feel because it's relatively like a new angle, I feel like it's already kind of like, what would you say the word is, kind of it's almost kind of fixed itself a little bit over the time, and kind of it's kind of refining how it works.
Yeah.
Maybe like TV or other mediums did, they were a bit kind of all over the shop at the beginning, and then it becomes a little bit more
Yeah. Yeah.
condensed in how it gets used. And maybe that's a positive thing in terms of, like you said, whether it's like those disclaimers
Mm.
or people realizing it's not the be all and end all of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. I like to just see how it pan out, really.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. But yeah, just want to touch on a last question from Patreon here. I don't want to forget my lovely patrons. I had a question from Nate, very simple one. He just wants to know how you're doing. How are you doing post COVID? Are you back on the road as much as before, producing more, less than before? How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. So yeah, thanks for asking. There were people that supported that dub pack. And thanks to all you guys who did buy that. And, to be fair, that was something I needed to put out to kind of tie over from not having any gigs for that whole year, pretty much. And yeah, I had a bit of savings, luckily. which I've kind of blown through, and kind of I'm back to square one on that front. So kind of like I survived through COVID and managed to not have to like move out of my house or rent somewhere else smaller, so I could keep the studio here. But yeah, gigs are kind of back, and I think still this year is not going to quite be probably for everyone. And I've been talking to a couple of agents this week about festivals and gigs and things like that, and it's still not going to quite be the same. I know people at Glastonbury who are working on there, and just so many other industries, the infrastructure and materials and all of that stuff's affected. So I think there's so much stuff even, you know, any of us don't think about, where you're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that because you can't get wood as easily.
Yeah, supply chain stuff. Yeah,
like set design for a festival thing,
oh,
or
yeah,
this. Yeah, there's not many tents left, and all. There's so many things that like you don't really think about.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And again, it affects us with vinyl. That's just like horrifically slow to get a record pressed to vinyl and get it released. So that's why people may have seen Symmetry not doing as much vinyl, because it's just the tri-audio stuff almost took a year to get that back. You know, that's how long it took.
Yeah.
And there were, you know, delays during that. So it's yeah, things like that are still slow for everyone in the industry, and it's nothing for me personally. Luckily for me, I've still just got my studio and I can make tunes as much as I ever did, and I've got some really good stuff planned for this year and early next year. So there's some big projects on the way, and we've got some wicked, you know, signings for Symmetry as well that will come out this year. So there's good music to come out, and there are some really good shows in the diary for this year. So I'm pretty pleased that yeah, everything's come back close to normal, and maybe 2023 will be kind of, I'm hoping, back to just as if nothing happened.
Yeah, the full on normal.
Yeah, it's a big block of time. But yeah, it's kind of, it's getting there.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, man. Before I let you go, I'm gonna finish with a new segment I'm trying out here. Quick fire round, 10 questions.
Oh, cool.
Short answers, and we'll see how you do. So first one, most important piece of advice you'd give for a beginner producer?
Just stick to your guns.
Best drum and bass memory?
Oh man, how am I meant to do that in quick fire?
That first one that comes to mind.
For a gig, Lion's Den at Boomtown was pretty special.
All right. Most embarrassing drum and bass memory?
I've clanged some mixes in front of really big DJs. I was in front of Andy C and Goldie and clanged a mix on vinyl that I'd practiced loads. And was like,
all right. Number 4, any pre-show ritual you have?
No.
Number 5, best DJ you've gone B2B with?
Randall.
Nice. 6, favorite venue, either to perform or just attending?
Would you say favorite venue?
Yeah.
Would have been the End.
Okay. 7, occupation if music didn't exist in the world?
Photographer.
Nice. Number 8, any superstitions?
I don't walk on ladders. I walk under ladders, or the third, what do you call it? Third, like drain, the third telecom box. You've got to jump that one.
Oh, wow. I've never heard that one. Okay. Number 9, one thing you could change about the drum and bass scene today? Or improve, or
better sound systems everywhere.
All right, nice one. And finally, would you rather always be 10 minutes late or 20 minutes early for any meeting appointment for the rest of your life?
I think early.
20 minutes early? All right.
Yeah.
Same here. You're my man. 20 minutes early. I hate people.
I've grown out of that late thing. I did it for years. Like, I'm going to get there 1 minute before, shave it, and it's just like, it just gets too stressful, man.
Brilliant. All right. You did brilliant, man. Really enjoyed this chat. Loved meeting you and chatting with you.
Likewise.
Before I let you go, maybe let people know any projects you have upcoming, shows you're playing? Where can people check you
Yeah.
out?
So yeah, the next release we got on Symmetry is DLR and Break, a tune called Absolutely True, and that looks like it's going to be out on the 20th of May. And yeah, Jack Boston's got a really cool tune lined up, and Dr. Mika. So they're kind of the next people releasing, and I've got some big tunes from myself for later on this year. And for the shows, yeah, we just had a big Symmetry show. There's nothing specifically in the short term planned with us. There's just other shows I'm playing at, like Balter Festival, and I think for the UK, yeah, Hit and Run in Manchester and Outlook UK, things like that to watch out for. So yeah, that's kind of it for now. And yeah, from the other projects, I've also got a release coming out soon, and another Degrees track called Nothing Else. So that's a really cool tune to look out for as well.
All right. Brilliant. Well, again, thanks a lot for your time, man. I know you're busy, so really appreciate it. And all the best with the future break releases, Symmetry, and all the rest of it.
Wicked, man. Thanks again.
All right.
Nice one.
Cheers.
Good.